Welcome to DotLife. We are having a full jam-packed episode today with cycling and a great Tiny Dot concert. But before we get into that, we're starting out with Bill Forry here at the Dorchester Reporter. Hello, Bill.
Welcome back.
Thank you for having us.
It's nice and cool in here.
It is not cool outside.
Or in our homes.
I'm in my jorts.
Yeah. I feel like I could dress normally because I'm in an environment where I'm not melting.
Yeah.
This office is like a pleasant 70 degrees, and that's not been the case anywhere in my home for the last,
same.
I don't know, 80 hours. It's been brutal.
My dog gets really mad when I hose him down, but he's panting constantly, so I just keep hosing him down, and he's getting angrier and angrier.
I feel bad for him.
Yeah, same.
But I feel bad for all of us. I mean, this has been a pretty brutal heat wave and heat emergency in the city of Boston. So we're almost at the end of it. That's what they told us.
It's early in the year.
Yeah, we're still in June.
We might do this again this summer.
I hope not, because we do not have central air conditioning on Richmond Street, and I deeply, deeply regret that decision.
What's your, my decision? I do it because I'm anti. I think it's bad. What's your?
Just, I own a newspaper and I have 2 kids in college. So, that's pretty much it. So we're going to suffer through whatever, the summer throws us. And, we got a hose too. So just like your dog, where we have alternatives. I was out in the yard later than usual last night, just hosing anything that looked like it might need it, including everything that was alive outside in our yard.
I watered the garden at 11 o'clock last night.
There you go.
It was lovely.
And it helps cool the house down a little bit, but not much.
No.
And right now, for whatever reason, we can only run 2. We do have window units, so we can only run 2 at a time, though. So there's always one bedroom that is not getting any relief. And
put John in there.
Well, John's smart enough. Our son John is helping this summer and is off camera right now, but he made the wise decision not to come home the last few nights and has an alternate apartment in Brighton. But I heard that's pretty brutal too.
That's not AC either.
Nope.
Man, we're a tough lot over here.
We're just going to suck it up.
Hardy people, yeah, definitely. So we've got some exciting news out of New York this morning. We are recording on Wednesday, so this is the day after the big mayoral primary. And shockingly, Zoran Mamdani actually comes out on top from what it looks like. Cuomo did concede last night, so the Democratic Socialist candidate has won the primary.
Yeah, kind of a shock to not only New York City, in its internal politics, but nationally. I think it's being read, at least so far, as a signal of what may be happening nationally from the Democratic perspective as a reaction to the new administration and the aggression of the Trump team towards especially, blue states and big cities like New York.
Well, and the failings of the Democratic Party. They've just not been winning and not resonating for at least a year now, so that something needs to change with the Democrats, and hopefully they'll listen. Establishment
Dems clearly are in retreat.
And they were not endorsing Mamdani.
They weren't. In fact, even like the New York Times was, they went out of their way, and they don't do local endorsements allegedly anymore, but they went out of their way to badmouth him and say, please don't elect this guy. But New York has had a different sensibility, Democratic voters, because it's a closed primary.
Right.
One big difference between New York and Boston municipal elections are New York does have a partisan system. So this was a Democratic closed primary on Tuesday. But very interesting how Mamdani, who's only a second-term state legislator, an assemblyman from Queens, 33 years old, was able to surge past somebody like Cuomo.
Universal name recognition, with former governor.
Yeah, with a lot more money. And by the way, very tarnished reputation, like kind of run out of town on a rail, really. Right. But he's from an iconic New York political family and has like the support of somebody like a Bill Clinton,
right?
Who late in the game was out there, stumping for him and obviously fundraising.
Yeah.
So Mamdani got outspent. I think Mamdani spent like $9 million, which is a lot. In the Boston context, that's a big sum. In New York, it's not as big. But his campaign was really more of a viral online social media appeal, and he used it brilliantly.
Social media and also retail politics. He was very much going out and meeting people. He did the whole walk Manhattan from top to bottom, and shook hands and talked to people. And Cuomo was largely absent from this race.
And as he was doing those walks, he was on video most of the time, and like talking to people in an intimate sort of way. He also did have support from high-profile political leaders. They just weren't their traditional Democratic establishment figures. It was Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders, which from that base, the Democratic base, controversial figures, nationally, but in the New York context, clearly has appeal. So, what does this mean next? I mean, one of the interesting things for our discussion here in Boston is what are are there any corollaries here with our race that's going on now with Michelle Wu, an incumbent, being challenged by three men, including Josh Kraft, who's the big name and obviously the well-funded, well-financed, and the favorite to be, in the top two, in the finalist. Boston, of course, has a preliminary election in September. There are two other men running, Robert Carpucci, who we profiled in the Reporter this week, and we'll talk a little bit about him. We talked last week about Domingos de Rosa, who's also running against Michelle Wu. So because of those two men, we have a prelim in September. And keep in mind, just like in New York too, we also have early voting in Boston. We have voting. People are going to be voting before Labor Day. They're going to be voting in August.
Okay.
And so it's coming pretty fast. Yeah. We're almost in July here. So this race is really coming to a head for us. I think one of the things to take away from New York, from the Boston perspective, is Michelle Wu has a lot in common with the winner of last night's Democratic primary. Yeah. She herself was is left of center, is perhaps not the establishment favorite all the time with locally, although she's obviously built a coalition.
Right.
The difference is she's an incumbent. So this is being framed in New York as sort of a change election, anti-incumbent. But that's because the incumbent in New York is Eric Adams, right? Let's keep in mind this is
as flawed as they come in terms of candidates.
As flawed as you can get. And he's obviously was indicted for corruption. Those have miraculously disappeared given his coziness with Donald Trump.
Yep.
And what we can see now is that, and as my phone's ringing in the background, so you're in a newsroom, what's interesting also for Michelle Wu is that both Mamdani and another progressive candidate in New York, Brad Lander, are clearly fans of Michelle Wu. They did a lightning round question in one of the debates just before this election in New York City, and they asked the candidates, who do you think is the most effective and kind of important Democrat now in the whole country? And there were a variety of answers from the, I think, 8-person field. But Michelle Wu was the pick of Zoran Mamdani and Brad Lander.
Wow.
And it's interesting to, Brad Lander, who finished out of the running, I think he had like 10 or 11% of the vote on Tuesday, is very much in league with Mamdani. So they endorsed each other in this ranked choice election that they do have in New York City.
And that's a big difference you see between the Boston race and the New York race. Ranked choice voting, it behooves them to be kind and to have this cross-endorsement relationship. You're not seeing that here. It's actually getting a little bit nasty.
No, we haven't seen that in a while in Boston. We, of course, don't have ranked choice voting.
Right.
There's a movement afoot and a home rule petition to bring it to city elections. But that has to go through a whole process that we're still in fairly early stages of, actually.
What's your prospect on that? You think it's likely?
I think the legislature is unlikely to really move that quickly. At least it may eventually happen, but I don't think it's going to happen. It certainly won't impact this year's election, of course. Right. Maybe for future elections, but there's a big debate about whether it even makes sense here. We've recently run commentaries on both sides.
I think they have it in Maine, in all of the elections.
In the state elections, right? Yeah. And they clearly have it locally in Cambridge and I believe in Somerville as well. So it's not, a wildly out of context concept here. Right. But it would be in Boston. It would be a new dynamic. People do, point to the at-large race here, which we obviously have 4 votes to split among however many candidates. This year we happen to have 9 at-large candidates in the prelim, will have 4 votes.
But you're not ranking them. You're just picking your top 4.
That's correct.
Yeah.
But there are little ways you can weight it. Like there's something called the bullet vote where you can just vote for one of those 4 candidates instead of giving all, splitting the vote up. So there's little tactics with that, but it would be very different than ranked choice voting, which what we'll see here in New York is the vote totals will change over the next week as they assign those number 2 and number 3 votes around the table there.
It won't change much. This was not very close.
No, I think it was 43.5% for Mamdani to like 36 for Cuomo. And Cuomo did, he gave a gracious speech from what we've heard. But this contest is not over, and the Eric Adams dynamic is fascinating. He's going to run as an independent. He's the incumbent mayor, but has a huge cloud over his head, is sort of, in, if not lockstep, in league with the Trump agenda.
When you get indictments dropped, that tends to happen.
Yeah, he has every reason in the world, I guess, to flip.
Yeah.
Here in Boston, it's going to be a different race, but what isn't different is that it's getting rather testy and pretty quickly. And part of it is the super PAC money that's entered this Boston race now. What we've seen just in the last few weeks, and people watching us on YouTube here have no doubt seen the advertisements on both sides. The super PAC that's right-leaning and has a fair amount of crossover donor support from the same people who support Trump. Have raised over $3 million for the PAC that's really backing Josh Kraft and going after Mayor Wu. And they're spending a lot of that money right now on the airwaves, especially on social media platforms like YouTube. And they're really going after her on things like White Stadium and bike lanes and the things that are controversial and an issue in the city. Affordability, too, which is something that was big in the New York race.
Yeah. Mamdani very much focused in on just pocketbook issues, as they say. I never understood that phrase. I don't have a pocketbook.
I don't have one either, shockingly. I think the other super PAC that's active for Mayor Wu has raised something on the order of $1 million and is also spending that. There's attack ads going that are up and running now about that issue, about the Trump donors also giving to the super PAC that's backing Josh Kraft. So this race is really forming. It is fundamentally a 2-person race, obviously. I did want to mention, because we wrote a profile and published it this week about Robert Capucci, who I think it's interesting. Like, why is an 80-year-old guy from East Boston who really hasn't won any elections recently running for mayor? Again, this is his 4th time running for mayor. He got the 3,000 signatures, so he's on the ballot. But why is he doing it? So we had a young reporter, Lucas de Oliveira, who's a Boston University student, one of a few who have been working with us this year.
Oh, that's cool.
To go out. He also did a great profile last week, I thought, on Domingos de Rosa.
Yeah.
But Mr. Capucci's interesting because it's, he's living in East Boston. He's clearly a Republican, right-leaning, favors what Trump is doing, he's told us, on immigration matters, and is not happy with Mayor Wu's policies on a number of things, including, mass and caste, which Domingos de Rosa also brings up as a key issue. And so does Josh Kraft. So, there's 3 people who are pretty sharply critiquing her on a variety of things. And yet, Kraft is clearly the one with the best chance to win.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting, though, what motivates people like Robert Capucci. We asked him, and, he did. What I found interesting in this story was he did win 2 elections in the 1980s for Boston School Committee. And he served 2 terms on the Boston School Committee until that body was changed entirely
to appointments,
which to an appointed school committee. So there's no more elected positions on that.
And his father was an elected official, right?
Yeah, and I didn't know that either. His dad was a state representative from East Boston, and apparently told young Robert Capucci that, listen, son, you're not cut out for this political stuff. And he obviously didn't listen. He sort of chuckles about that. And says, look, I'm not a quitter, and I believe in what I believe. I want to run, and people can quarrel whether that's a sensible thing to do or not. But in this instance, if it's not for Robert Capucci and Domingos de Rosa, we don't have a prelim. Is that important? I mean, I know, I see you shaking your head. So you're
I'm not shaking my head. I'm turning my head. I'm not sure, because I feel like that's one of the benefits of ranked choice is that you kind of get the prelim baked in, right? So it is going to cost us more money to run multiple elections if we, right?
Clearly, there'll be costs involved. I think we were going to have a prelim anyways, so the ballots would have to be made and go out to all those precincts.
Just not for mayor.
Because for prelim, I mean for the city council at large.
Okay. So it's not
all their fault. If you're annoyed because it's a prelim, it's not just Bob Capucci and Domingos de Rosa to be annoyed with. There's 9 people running for city council, so you can be pissed off.
Okay, I'm mad at them too. No, I mean, frankly, I don't really care, but I understand the pushback on that.
Yeah, I think strategically though, it does change things. Like for a Josh Kraft or a Michelle Wu, like
it changes their timing. Yeah, absolutely.
And how they spend and like what their messaging might be and when, like you said. So it does change the dynamics a little bit. So anyways, we'll see what happens. Another political note to make, and I think you want to talk about other things in the Reporter and elsewhere. This is the last week on the Boston City Council for Tanya Fernandez-Anderson, who is officially stepping down on July 4th. And then she's actually going to be sentenced for her federal convictions later in July. But she sent out word last week that she would, be true to her word and step down.
There was some question, right, whether she would actually honor that.
Right, yeah.
I'm glad she did.
A couple of months ago, she said she would, and then it got delayed. There was some pressure from her colleagues to get it done, and for a variety of reasons. One is about a special election, because if she had resigned a month ago, people would be pissed off that there's a special in August, right? And why are we doing that? And so I do think there was a fiscal, reason to, a responsibly fiscal reason to not do that. Yeah. And I think probably that was the right move. So 2 things to know is if you live in District 7, and many Dorchester people do because it includes parts of Upham's Corner, Dudley Street, Triangle, etc., you'll be without district representation until the end of the year.
And it's an open seat for the election.
It's an open seat.
Yeah. And there's a huge number of candidates.
Yeah, I think the number is around 10 or 12 candidates, and we are writing about that race, so we'll be talking about that. Don't worry. But, that's important to know just for folks who aren't aware of this. District 7 does include, it's centered in Roxbury, but also has chunks of Dorchester, and other city councilors are going to have to pick up the slack, frankly, constituent-wise, over the next few months to step in, because her office, she will have staff remaining. Councilor Fernandez-Anderson's staff will still be there, but she won't have a vote. District 7 won't have a district vote.
There is one question I had for you about Josh Kraft. So you say that this is a nonpartisan race, but his signs clearly say Josh Kraft, Democrat for mayor.
That's interesting. Yeah, you're right. They do. I wonder if Michelle Wu has done that.
Yeah, I don't know.
Or what the precedent is. I think, that clearly there's a sensitivity there, right?
Yeah.
Because I think
he's doing it. He's like, thou protesteth too much, right? Like, I'm a Democrat, really.
Yeah, I'm going to have to go. It's a really good point, and I'm going to have to go check on some of the signage. We have a mini collection here. I don't think Tom Menino ever did that. Okay. Marty Walsh may have.
Okay.
And maybe it's him coming out of the State House and where you do have a partisan election, obviously, and so some of your merch and your branding might have that on there. But that's a good point. It speaks to maybe, Kraft really, really needs to and is desperate to get away from this tag.
Yeah.
Because it could be a fatal one. Obviously part of Michelle Wu's strategy, and it's a sensible one, is to paint her opponent as Trumpy.
Right.
That's a loser here in Boston. I mean, I understand there's 20% of roughly the city that probably likes the president.
Definitely.
But that's not good odds for anybody running on the ballot here in a city election. And he has been tagged with that now because of the donor crossover. Yeah. Now, I want to be clear that PACs, super PACs, they're forbidden from coordinating their
with the campaign.
Yeah, with the campaigns, advertising and whatnot. But that doesn't prevent the public's perception from saying, okay, wait a minute, this is the same playbook, same donor group, like.
Well, even if they're not coordinating, they've obviously seen things in Kraft that make them think he's amenable to their sensibilities, or they wouldn't be contributing.
I think that that's true, although I also think, and we saw basically the same group of donors line up in the last election against Michelle Wu for Anissa Asabi-George.
Yeah.
And I think the Asabi-George folks, were you like having money come in to help you, but sometimes, you get tagged as something that's really not your politics.
Right.
And, I don't think that Josh Kraft, frankly, is a right-wing, Trumpy Republican. I think he has an element of conservatism when it comes to housing, and he certainly doesn't share the mayor's policies across the board, but he's been pretty clear and consistent about he doesn't support the president's position on immigration, for instance.
Okay.
Has he been as full-throated about that as he could be? Maybe not. And that's where, the super PACs, which can help you, can also hurt you.
Right.
If the public's takeaway is, it's the same old with that.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about economic development coming out of the mayor conversation. We have a new business in Dorchester on .ev.
Right.
And this one is a chain, I guess. The second location, the first one was in Easton, and the owner is Melissa Mazzeo, I believe her name is.
I think that's right. Yeah, Melissa is second generation, part of a family business that, as you mentioned, started in Easton. It's a consignment
chain
shop.
Is tongue in cheek, of course.
Right. Yeah, they got two. Just like I have a chain of newspapers there. The Merry-Go-Rounds is a curated children's consignment shop. And it's located right next to one of our favorite restaurants, Via Canuccia, on Dorchester Avenue in the St. Mark's area.
Okay.
And it just opened in May. It's based on the shop that's in Easton, which folks may know. And it's done very well there. It's been around for a couple of decades. I think her mom and dad started it, and her mom has run it. So she was part of that family business, went on to some other pursuits in her adult life, and has now been part of the family business again, but is living in Dorchester. She and her partner live there and in the Four Corners neighborhood. So it's kind of her adopted home, something you can relate to, Erin. And like so many people who've chosen to live here, they see the opportunities that are here. And one of them in a space that Melissa thinks can thrive is children's consignment. And the model's interesting. It's something I'm definitely going to take advantage of, because as my oldest son here can attest, we have plenty of surplus children's clothing and equipment from over the years. So this is a place that people are encouraged to check out. Even if you don't need to buy for a youngster, you may have things that you could put on consignment there.
Do you know how old the kids' clothes go up to? Is it?
I think it's really geared towards the younger kids.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's like infant up to, I don't know, like preteen maybe.
Okay.
Yeah.
And they take clothes donations, or is it consigned?
I think it's all consignment.
Consigned. Okay.
Yeah.
And it's some new as well, I believe.
Exactly.
Okay.
I think that's what they're focused on. So it's a nice development to see new business coming into a block where, I think that space was vacant. And at one point, I think we were thinking maybe Via Canuccia will expand into that. And they've obviously done great in the space they do have. If you haven't checked out Via Canuccia, by the way.
Yeah.
Right,
excellent.
Some of the best bakery goods around, too, for on the weekends. You get in there early, and there's quite an assortment.
But we're talking about merry-go-rounds, Bill. Stop getting us hungry.
I know. I'm sorry, it's that time of the afternoon here.
Merry-go-rounds, by the way, is a very cool name for a consignment shop for kids. Like, very, very cute. I also really love the environmental aspect of this. So a lot of people just, try to give away kids' clothes, but they often can't find a person that they know who needs them, so they end up trashing them. And this is a really great way to. Kids' clothes don't generally get used that much. A lot of people. I know a lot of people who've had kids in my friend group who they get so many outfits when the kids are tiny that they maybe wear them once. Sometimes not at all. And
exactly.
Or they get them when they're like newborn and they don't fit, so they never wear them.
Yeah.
So this is a great way to get rid of them.
I hope it's helpful to we've over the years, I can say, my wife and I have, passed on a lot of clothes to friends and relatives and things, and I think the concept here is to help families that need that.
Yeah.
And it's an affordable an affordable price point, and we have a ton of kids. I mean, Dorchester is still the part of the city, and we know this from BPS stats, with the largest school age population around.
Yeah.
So there's obviously a market here for it, and we wish her well. I
Absolutely.
think it's a smart idea.
Very cool. There's another Dorchester-based female making news. She's the valedictorian of Boston Arts Academy, which is not in Dorchester, but was for 3 or 4 years while they were building that gorgeous new facility over in the Fenway neighborhood. But tell us about her.
Leah Pires is the valedictorian at Boston Arts Academy this year. She's 17 years old. Grew up in Dorchester and has, I think, Cape Verdean heritage.
Okay.
She has been a dancer at some level or another since she was 2 years old. So she's got real skill. And her dream, she told us this week, when she was in 8th grade, she wrote down, "I'm going to, be an Alvin Ailey dancer someday." And in fact, she's been accepted and will be going in the fall to the Alvin Ailey School at Fordham University.
Awesome.
Where she's been going there every summer for their summer programming, and she's been accepted, which it's obviously an elite dance school in New York City. And what's also great about this story is she's a high-performing student, obviously, as the valedictorian. She had other options. She was admitted to other very prestigious universities across the country, but money was an issue, like for a lot of kids in our neighborhood. Fortunately, Boston Arts Academy has a foundation, and it's supported with a scholarship fund from Paul and Sandy Edgerly, who many people in Boston know are tremendous philanthropists and just very generous folks. They through their support, she's going to be able to do this, I think, in a full scholarship.
Wow.
That was her goal, at least, and it sounds like they are going to afford her the opportunity to take this this dream trip and her her education in New York. I thought it was interesting too. Leah told us her personal story about when she was real young. Her parents thought maybe Boston isn't the place to raise our daughter. Maybe she'd be better off in the suburbs. They moved to Whitman, Mass, and
I don't know where that is.
It's It's kind of past Brockton in that area, going down that kind of towards the south coast. But like a lot of people, I think. You think, well, if you go to the suburbs, that's a better opportunity for our kids. That's the perception sometimes. Right. And in fact, they found, wait a minute, we need to be in Boston. That's where, primarily because Boston Arts Academy is just a terrific institution. As you mentioned, they have a brand new facility next to Fenway Park. But for a few years, they were housed in Fields Corner. They shared space with what used to be the Grover Cleveland and Cash High School. They've since moved, but she spent her freshman year close to home. She's from the Upham's Corner neighborhood. So this is a great story about, and we have a whole page of valedictorian news, about other young people from our community. Most of them we focused on this week was Boston Public High Schools, but Leah really stood out as somebody who's got this fascinating story. And
awesome. Good luck to her. That's great.
Very proud of all these kids. We'll have more graduates and valedictorians in next week's edition from some of the private schools, and not all of them are Dorchester kids. We Southie, JP, the surrounding neighborhoods, obviously Mattapan. Yep. We have a ton of talented kids coming out of our city right now. Speaking
of schools, there's an extensive story in the Reporter about the exam schools, which we talked about quite a bit last week, but there's a little bit more of a nuance here about what's going on at the federal government level with DE&I programs and how that's a bad word and a bad concept, and how that might add more nuance or add a little more monkey wrench to the works about this exam policy.
Yeah, and part of it's, the whims of this administration and the Department of Education and how that's, they can clearly decide where they're going to target their challenges legally. Boston's a likely target. Yeah. And in part because there's already been resistance here from parents and people, including, national think tanks that are focused on education, that claim that Boston's policy right now is discriminatory against white and Asian students specifically. Yeah. Chris Lovett, who's, a Boston Latin School graduate, veteran Boston journalist, and has been writing about BPS issues for close to 50 years now. Okay. Wrote the story for us this week. If you need a deep dive into what's going on with the admissions issue in exam schools, this is the story for you, and you may need to, it might be a Sunday read. It's like 2,500 words, but it's a complicated issue.
Yeah.
We scratched the surface of that last week and right now, but it's, Chris gets into the layers of the various challenges over the decades and how this policy has evolved and why now is a moment, and in part because it's an election year,
right,
where it's coming into sharper focus right at the moment. But, what the feds decide to do, like with everything we're talking about pretty much these days, is determinative on this, because they could come in and just undo or attempt to. Now, there'll be legal challenges to that. But they're already doing something similar to that in Virginia at the moment, which Chris details in this story. So something to keep in mind as this Boston policy gets reviewed.
It's summer.
Yeah.
So let's talk about all the fun things that are going on in the city.
Yeah, this weekend's packed. All of a sudden, Saturday are two festivals pretty close to home. One is in Dorchester, arguably. It's in Franklin Park. So Franklin Park straddles, as you know, like three neighborhoods. But it's at the Playstead. The BAMS Fest is this Saturday. I think it starts at noon. There's a whole lineup of artists, and
BAMS stands for
Boston Arts and Music something or other, right? I think. I don't know. You're going to check that out as we figure this out.
I thought you knew.
I should know, but I can't even get my state rep's name right sometime. What do I know?
Boston Art and Music Soul Fest.
Okay, there you go. So, and this has roots really with like the Alma Lewis Playhouse over the decades, and it's, as I said, at the Playstead in Franklin Park. So that promises to be a fun afternoon, evening of events. Is a great website, BAMS, that has, like, look it up on Google. They have a whole lineup of the schedule and everything. So
we've had some former BAMS performers. Paul Willis is one of them. A couple of ours, Noah Soul, played at Dorch Fest. They're always a hit, so definitely check out BAMS.
It's a good take, and I believe it's a free festival too. There's also a free show on Milton Hill, a lot smaller, but it's a 2-day festival coming up in Milton, just on Adams Street over the bridge from Lower Mills. And just as a reminder, there will be fireworks involved on Saturday night. So I need the dog owners in particular in the neighborhood to, be cognizant of that. It is a fun evening. And then Sunday is an all-day like Celtic music festival at the same location, Hutchinson's Field on the top of Milton Hill. I do want to call attention. There's also a very interesting letter to the editor in the Reporter this week from a gentleman whose dog freaked out from a fireworks display in the city like a couple of years ago, and so and it's a problem. Dogs run away and never come back. Sometimes it's terrible. So he has an article outlining his tips to other dog owners.
Nice.
He has a new dog and has trained the dog to be not as freaked out by fireworks. So he's given a lot of tips in this week's Reporter.
Have you seen the drone shows?
I've seen some drone shows.
I've never been to one. I've just seen seen them online. There's supposedly one in Harvard Park or Harvard, somewhere over near Harvard, later this summer.
Okay.
Those look really cool, and I think they're quiet.
Yeah, they're definitely not blowing up and scaring dogs everywhere.
Fireworks pose other problems too with fires. They actually have been implicated in like house fires and wildfires and things. So
it's something to watch for. The Milton folks have been doing this for a while, so it's like it's known. It's just like, which weekend is it going to be?
Yeah,
I'm with you. I think it's a fun time, but and then one other festival or upcoming event in Dorchester to mention is July 11th is the night market, which has been a huge success in Fields Corner. The Vietnamese community, the Little Saigon Cultural District is the main organizing force behind it. I believe it's 4 to 9:30 p.m. on Saturday, July 11th. So keep in mind, Dorchester Ave will be shut down between Adams Street and roughly Melville for a number of hours. But it's a great take if people haven't checked it out. It's becoming a big draw across the city for folks who are not only interested in Vietnamese culture and cuisine, but just a night out in the city.
Cool.
There's like a beer garden, all kinds of stuff. So be watching for more coverage of that next week in the Reporter.
You said that's on the 11th?
July 11th.
Cool.
Yeah, it's a Saturday afternoon, evening.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Well, stay cool.
I'm going to stay in this office until further notice, probably.
And next week is July 4th, so I don't think we'll see you.
Happy Independence Day.
Yeah,
enjoy.
You too.
I hope you have a great one.
Thanks.
Thank you.
DotLife is sponsored in part by the Dorchester Reporter, Dorchester's own community newspaper and online home for all things Dorchester at dotnews.com. The Reporter, owned and operated by the Forry family, has been laser focused on Dorchester and the surrounding neighborhoods of Boston since 1983. That longevity and experience shows in its award-winning coverage every week. The Reporter is our go-to source for authentic stories about the people, places, and events that matter most to our daily lives. We are proud to partner with The Reporter and Dot News. And you can support the important journalism provided by The Reporter. Just go to dotnews.com to subscribe today. It's the best deal in town and helps keep our local community journalism alive and well. Welcome back to DotLife. We are on a pretty steamy day here in Dorchester, but I'm joined in a very nicely air-conditioned space at Ashmont Cycles here on Dot Avenue with the owner of the place, Jack Pelletier. Jack, thank you so much for hosting us.
Yes, thanks for coming.
And Mandy Wilkens, who is a staff member at the Boston Cyclists Union. Hey, Mandy.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, of course. Really excited to have this conversation today. We're going to talk all about bicycling, which is a subject I don't know a lot about. So I'm going to be relying on both of you to give me a little bit of information. Before we start, the first question I have for you is, how often do you have Queen's bicycle song in your head? Because I have had it in my head since I decided to do this episode.
In my early years of the shop, I think I had it more often, but not so much
Not so
now.
much anymore.
Believe it or not, I haven't thought about that song in so long.
Well, you will all day now. So
Now
you're
I will.
welcome.
Now
Yeah.
I will.
So actually, the first question I actually have for you is, can you introduce yourselves and talk a little bit about Ashmont Cycles and the Cyclists Union? And Jack, I'll start with you.
Yep. My name is Jack Pelletier. I live here in Dorchester, and I opened this shop in March of 2011, so we're in our 15th year right now. For 9+ years, the shop was located about a block north of here at PVD Square, and then we moved here in August of 2020, and the shop has grown. It's been well received, and I'm very happy to have done this and be doing this.
Awesome. Mandy?
Yeah, I'm with the Boston Cyclists Union. We are an advocacy group that's trying to make Boston and greater Boston streets safer for everybody, no matter if you're riding on 2 wheels, 4 wheels, or 2 legs. And most of our campaigns are volunteer-driven. We also have a data team that looks at maps, tries to create stories with the data that the city's producing, but not doing a whole lot with. And so, yeah, we're responsible for a lot of the safer infrastructure that you've seen popping up in the city, alongside the mayor's office and the streets cabinet. And yeah, we're really proud of the work that we've done.
Awesome. I want to talk about bicycling basics for people like me who don't really bicycle very often. Beneficially, obviously, this has a lot of perks for health, for mental health, for your social life. Mandy, I want to start with you. Can you talk about some of the reasons that you guys push or advocate for bicycling as a hobby/lifestyle?
I mean, like, you're totally right. There's health benefits. Obviously, it's, depending on how you do it, it's a form of very good exercise, keeps you fit. It's great for your mental health. It's one of the only modes of transportation where, you can see all around you. You can talk to the person riding next to you. You can see a friend on the street and stop and say hi and chat for a little bit, which you don't get in a car. Sometimes on a train. But it's
Sometimes
also
when you don't want it on a train.
Yeah, exactly. But something that I always advocate for, one of the big reasons I started cycling, is that it's also one of the cheaper ways to get around the city. Mm-hmm. Bikes are not particularly expensive in the long run, and they're pretty much free to ride from point A to point B. especially bike share systems like Blue Bikes. It's like $60 a year. Like, really can't beat that.
Wow.
So,
and they're pretty much all over now. I see them.
Oh, yeah.
in a lot. They've really increased the number of places that they have Blue Bikes in the city.
Especially with the e-bikes.
Yeah. And Jack, what do you hear from folks who come in looking for potentially their first bike? Is there a reason that they start picking up this hobby?
A lot of people are interested in picking it up because it's just an easier way to get around town. Boston traffic's notorious. Everyone knows that. It's frustrating. And then, some of the challenges that the T has had to go through shutting down, and some of the inconveniences that's had for some people in the short term. I think that has spurred people to take a look also as to other options to get around.
Yeah. What about from a health perspective? Do people generally pick it up, or is that just a byproduct of changing lifestyle?
I think a lot do. A lot of people will come in and say, "Yeah, I'm here for a bike. I need to," and they might pat their belly. Here, I gotta lose some weight. I don't know if that's the majority. I think it's more people just wanting to, being able to bike in the city. And I think that while the city has more to do in terms of incorporating more bike infrastructure, I think that things have changed a lot over the past, 10, 20 years.
Yeah.
Enough so that I think more people are invited to go out. Like they see it as like something that can be done as opposed to something that's fringe and, I'm not going to touch that kind of thing.
I mean, that said, I still think when I travel around, especially, other countries or other cities in the U.S. and even, Europe, you see a lot more embracing of cycling, a lot more people cycling. Do you think it's a mentality thing? Do you think it's an infrastructure thing? Do you think it's a policy thing? Do you think it's all of the above?
Yeah, historically, I think when you look at different places around the country where there is less bike infrastructure, you see a lot more people biking solely for recreation, for exercise, that sort of thing, and far less commuters. And I think where you see a lot of infrastructure, you see a lot more commuters, you see a lot more families on bikes. And I think you can see that pretty clearly if you look at the greater Boston area as a whole, where places like Cambridge, who have done like a superb job installing bike infrastructure over the past 5 years, have seen a huge booms in commuters, and just you can't go anywhere in Cambridge without seeing bikes. I think the Mass Ave Bridge, for example, has, even during rush hour, like 30% of the people on the bridge are bikes.
Wow.
That's crazy, unheard of, right? But that's not quite as true in places like Dorchester, where there's not so much bike infrastructure. Here you see a lot more people biking for recreation or for exercise.
Yeah. And that's still, you hear those stories, and then you still get a lot of opposition to adding bike lanes in new construction. For example, Blue Hill Avenue. I think if DotLife ever tried to put a bike lane on it, there would be riotous uproars. Why do you think that is?
I think a lot of people are still very car-centric.
Yeah.
I mean, American cities, in my opinion, since the end of World War II, the car boom and American cities were built to cater towards cars. And so that's baked into the psyche of a lot of cities. And so with driving your car around to your errands and such, is also you need parking. And so parking is a big issue. And I know from some of the articles I've read about the Blue Hill Ave discussion that parking is a big concern for a lot of the merchants that might be affected. So if you have a car in the city, there are considerations that have to be met in order for you to have your car in the city. And if you're not used to cycling, and if you're intimidated by it, then you don't see cycling as an option. You see your car as, your option, your solution.
Yeah. I think a lot of even like the new buildings that are going up, some of them will not have parking garages or parking availability, but they will have bicycle storage and bike racks. And still you hear people in the civic associations, that's pie in the sky. Like, people aren't going to do that, but it is possible. We just have to, I think, be a little more deliberate and intentional about development.
Right. I mean, I think a lot of what the city's doing right now is building for the future, right? Because when it's understandable why I think a lot of people, especially more on the outskirts of the city, need a car because, they work far away. And I think for a lot of people, like a car is the vehicle for economic opportunity, where there maybe isn't much in the neighborhood that they live in. But as you install bike infrastructure and safe infrastructure, you'll start to see more people biking, less people reliant on parking, and less traffic overall. And so, but these things are in the future. They're not necessarily right now. And so it's going to be a difficult fight.
Yeah.
Which is why I think a lot of these infrastructure plans are really focused around just improving safety. Because as cars are moving fast on these streets, like it is a safety problem, especially on, Dot Ave, where, I think, what was it, 2-3 years ago, a cyclist was hit and nearly fatally injured. They just barely survived. But like these are real issues. These are real issues that need to be addressed now.
Speaking of safety.
Yeah.
But when you talk about bike infrastructure, obviously we mentioned bike lanes, but what else goes into that infrastructure conversation?
So there's a lot of different factors. I think some really clear ones are shortening the distance between sidewalks so that pedestrians don't have to cross nearly as wide of a strip to get to the other side. That can look like islands in the middle of a road, like if you have a 4-lane road, or even more like Blue Hill Ave. Like it's really important to break up the pedestrians' walking cycles so that it becomes easier. You're only looking at one side of traffic. Another big factor is narrowing traffic lanes. Okay. When you narrow the size of a traffic lane, cars just instinctively drive slower. Yeah. It's much more effective than signage or that sort of thing. And as a bonus, when you narrow street lanes, you get extra space on the street. And so actually a lot of these bike lane projects are kind of a bonus. Like the bike lane is a bonus, but when really the goal was to narrow the lane.
And slow the traffic.
Right.
Okay.
But from a lot of people's perspective, they see the bike lane and they go, they're narrowing our street because they want to install a bike lane, when really the opposite is true.
Right,
yeah.
Right. You're a Dorchester resident, Jack. Do you cycle around here?
Yes.
Do you cycle on Dot Ave?
Yes.
How is that experience?
Previous to this, I had a job downtown.
Okay.
And I biked to work every day.
Okay.
Year round. And I cycled Dot Ave to get downtown.
Yeah.
And I did that for about 10 or 15 years. And in that time, when I started, I was one of the few that I saw out there. But as the years went by, I did anecdotally see more and more cyclists.
Yeah.
And the place where I parked my bike when I was working, it used to be, again, there was a bike rack there, and I would lock my bike, and there'd be a few others. And the summer would get busier, but there was always a parking space. But towards the last years I was doing that, if I didn't get there by a certain time, there was no place to park my bike.
The bike rack was full.
Right.
That's a good thing.
Right.
Frustrating.
Yeah. Definitely notable.
I was here first.
Right, definitely notable. But also, in the wintertime.
You biked in the winter?
Yeah.
I did too.
Yeah.
I don't understand you people.
It's becoming much easier now.
It is.
But
yeah. Although today is probably worse than winter.
Oh, yeah. I'd much rather be, but I wish it was, 20.
But back then I used to see, in the summertime, a lot of cyclists, and then the cooler weather would come in the fall, and the number of bikes at the parking space would trickle down. And then in the winter, it would just be me. And then after a couple of winters, there was another bike that stayed all winter. And then, and so by the end, again, by the time I was finished that career aspect of my life, there certainly were more people riding in the summer, but there also were a growing number of bicycles at the spot year round.
So if people wanted to try getting into cycling as a commute, actually, let's take a step back. Let's say they want to start cycling and they want to do it recreationally, just to kind of get comfortable. Are there trails that you guys recommend? Places that you've been that you would say this is definitely a fun ride?
I think the Neponset Greenway is like a great example of that.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah.
It's so beautiful.
And it's very nice.
It's very nice.
Very well paved.
Very well paved. Yeah. That's just a great place to go.
Yeah.
There's also a lot of beautiful trails up north, like the Minuteman Parkway, the Northern Strand, even inner city bike paths like the Somerville Community Path or the Southwest Corridor are really great, even if you're not experienced on a bike.
The Southwest Corridor goes down to, does it go to Hyde Park?
It goes to Forest Hills.
Okay.
Yeah, from downtown.
Any others?
As far as people, here at the shop, I have people coming in saying, I want to get a bike, and they haven't had a bike for a while, and some adults don't even know how to ride a bike. Oh, wow. And so there's definitely, for a lot of people, some anxiety and intimidation.
Yeah.
With doing this.
I will raise my hand.
Yeah. I've been cycling year round, since I was a kid. Okay. And so for me, like biking in the city, I've been doing it for quite a while, so I'm very comfortable. I pay attention, but I'm very comfortable where I absolutely understand that if someone were just doing this for the first time, that this would be, a bit of a white knuckle experience to start. So I tell people, you have your bike and, you work over at this place and you've figured out a route. And very often they say yes. And I'll tell them, what you should do is you should go there on a Sunday, ride that route on a Sunday when traffic's quieter, and just go do it just to get your bearings. So that Monday morning, your first
when
day.
When it's terrible.
Biking, right. So I tell people that. And then I also tell people, have a good bike, good helmet.
Yeah.
But I also tell them that as much as they may think they look ridiculous, they should absolutely go over the top to be seen.
Okay.
High visibility clothing.
Yep.
Flashing lights. That's what I use. A few years ago, I was driving my car. I dropped my daughter off at daycare, and I was coming off a side street onto Dot Ave, and in the car, and I looked, and automatically you're looking for cars. When you get your license, it's like, look for cars. No cars, you can go. And I remember seeing a friend of mine who I knew from the neighborhood coming down the street this way. And in my head, I was like, oh yeah, there's so-and-so. And I was like, looking for cars. And no cars. And I was going to accelerate through, and I stopped myself. What are you doing? And, my friend, the cyclist, went through, and I was thinking, very often we're all, we wear a lot of earth tones.
Yeah.
And then when you're on your bike, you're vertically oriented.
Right.
And if you look outside, everything is vertically oriented. Trees, street poles, so that on a bike, you need to do everything you can to stand out visually. Mm-hmm. Just to, assert your presence. And I'm not saying that in an aggressive way, but just drivers are thinking, looking for cars. And I think it's slowly changing where they're looking for bikes now too. But still, that's when you learn how to drive, that's what you're taught.
Well, I think that's a good point. And I'm not sure if this is something that the Boston Cyclists Union focuses on, but education and getting people conditioned earlier, is that something that's in the works at all with from the policy perspective or from educational perspective?
I think from our perspective, I think cycling has a bad rap as far as danger is concerned. I think that it is statistically, it's just as dangerous as being a pedestrian or driving in a car. But perception-wise, I think a lot of people view it as this, extremely dangerous thing. When I first started biking, in Boston especially, the people around me were like, what are you doing? Like, do you want to die? But I'm still here, Yeah. I actually haven't ever gotten into any serious accident in Boston, and I'm happy about that.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think what we need is more people biking. It'll become safer when there are more people biking.
When there's more awareness and visibility. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I think the biggest thing is knowing where you're going, knowing your neighborhood, knowing your streets, and that gets learned by experience. Mm-hmm. And, visibility is very important, but it shouldn't be paralyzing.
Yeah.
Because even if you're fully decked out in all your gear, if you don't have the experience, then that is going to be the thing that puts you in danger. And I love that idea of going out on a Sunday, going out at night, going out really early in the morning. These are things that make it easier. Or even just going on these trails, like just getting your bearings.
And your confidence. Yeah. I want to talk about equipment. So if you are selling a bike to someone, first of all, how do you help them select a bike?
When a customer comes in and they say, I'm looking for a bike, one of the first questions we ask is, first of all, do you have a bike?
Okay.
Yes or no. And the second question is, what do you want to do with your bike? Mm-hmm. And some people say, I'm going to be doing the Pan Mass Challenge or some charity ride this summer. And so, I want a road bike to do that. And so that steers us in one direction. For most people, the answer to that question is, I just want a bike to get around, ride with my kids, go to the store, just, a reliable bike just to get around. And so then we go over the options of that, and after we show them the options and they, point out which ones interest them, and then we figure out sizing and budget and narrow things down.
Okay.
So it's a series of questions that just broad questions to bring it down.
So what are the essentials that you want to make sure someone leaves with when they have a bike?
So a bicycle, and I always say a helmet.
Okay.
And then a lock. I can't tell you the number of customers who have come back at some point after buying a bike and just saying, someone stole my bike.
I've seen a lot of bike thefts on, I used to live in JP, so I have the JP Facebook group still, and there's often bikes that get picked up from even people's yards, and they try to resell them, and hopefully folks like you and others in the city are able to kind of help stop that to some extent, although I'm sure it's not easy.
Yeah, every now and then we'll get a phone call or an email sent from somebody somewhere in the city to, bike shops all over the city just saying, hi, I'm so-and-so, my such and such bike was stolen yesterday, and this is what it looks like, and if anyone sees it. Unfortunately, they don't turn up. And the person who steals the bike doesn't come in to a shop and say, can you fix this? Pretty much it's just they steal it, it's sold for
Facebook Marketplace or something. Yeah.
Or maybe even less, and then it's just out there in the world.
So helmet, bike lock,
and lights.
Lights, okay.
And light technology has really improved. Lights now are often rechargeable and extremely bright, and they have a daytime flashing mode. So it's not. I don't use my lights on my bike even at night to see the road. There's enough ambient light in town to see the road. Mm-hmm. What I want is, the flashing
to be
light
seen.
To be seen.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And so there are a lot of lights now have a daytime flashing mode, so that even on a bright day like today, it's a pulse of light that you see if you're in a car. So things like that.
And for the cycling aficionados, what are the extras that you either use or sell to people who are looking for, that additional piece of equipment?
On our end, a lot of people want phone holders so they can have a phone to find their way around town, and water bottle cages and things to carry water.
Are baskets still in?
Yep.
Okay.
Racks. Especially if you're going to be commuting to work.
Yeah.
A lot of people wear a backpack. When I used to commute to work, I stopped wearing a backpack because it's uncomfortable. You're sweaty.
Yeah.
And so you can get a rack in the back with bags. There are many different varieties out there. So you can make the whole getting to work on your bike or the whole going shopping on your bike experience much more, comfortable.
Yeah. How about you, Mandy?
I think overall, like, the best bike is the one that you're going to ride. And I think that changes for everybody. I think a lot of people want an e-bike now, which is great because I think a lot of people are turned off by pedaling on your bike. And an e-bike solves that problem. They're really great. And but I think broadly, whatever gets you on the bike is the best bike for you. And I think just taking things one step at a time. Obviously, looking at laws too, because you do need lights at night. But yeah, whatever gets you on a bike. I personally, I don't like any kind of racks or anything on my bike.
You're not tricked out?
No, I'm not tricked out. I have like a bunch of variety of different small bags, like shoulder bags that I have that fit whatever I need. Today I have a water bottle cage on my bike because it's so hot. But
yeah. What about maintenance? How often do you tune up your bike?
When I started riding my bike, I didn't really want to pay a mechanic to fix my bike. Sorry. So I actually was able to learn a lot of it myself, and I think a lot of it is very accessible. There's a lot of groups, bike kitchens around the Boston area. There's one on .Av called Dorchester Bike Kitchen, where they will teach you how to fix and maintain your bike for free.
So they don't cook bikes. That's
they
not
don't cook bikes.
It's a little misleading.
It's a little misleading, but they have all the tools you'll need. So, but obviously that's not for everybody, which is why bike shops are so wonderful. But I would estimate, I think you should do a full maintenance once a year, whether that's at a shop or on your own. And I try to clean my chain probably every 2 weeks, but I'm a little bit on top of that. I like a clean chain.
Yeah.
But you can probably get away with like once a month.
And do you carry any sort of tools in case there's a flat or a chain falls off or anything, or are you kind of stuck?
On a longer ride, I'll bring enough to fix a flat tire, but I think that's for rides that are longer than like 30 miles, which I'm not doing all that often.
Okay.
Usually I ride with whatever I have, and if I get a flat, which I have every now and then, it's like there's always the train or the bus.
That's true. It's not like you're stranded in the middle of the countryside somewhere, typically.
and Uber now too.
And Uber, yeah.
Uber, yeah. Any other maintenance tips, Jack?
I tell customers when they buy a bike that their responsibility is oil the chain and keep the tires pumped up to the recommended pressure. And then in answer to how often should I come in to get it fixed, I tell people it depends on how often you use it. If you just ride only on summer days like today versus someone who rides year round in all kinds of weather, that person definitely needs to come in for, a spring tune-up, cleaning, replacing parts. And so I just tell customers, if you just want to stop in and say, do you think this bike needs, I don't think anything's wrong with it, but do you think it needs anything? We try to give them an honest answer and say yes or no.
Yeah.
But oiling the chain and pumping the tires is what.
Those are the minimums.
Everyone should be doing.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yep.
So I want to shift to the social aspect of cycling, bicycling. You mentioned these bike kitchens. In addition to being maintenance, offering tutorials, what else do bike kitchens offer?
So that is their primary function.
Okay.
It's a volunteer community as well. There's Somerville Bike Kitchen. There's the BU Bike Kitchen for BU students. There's Bike to the Sea, which has one on the Northern Strand. And I think a lot of these bike kitchens also try to build kind of community with group rides as much as they can, and collaborate with other groups. There's a big group in Boston called Critical Mass. Every last Friday of the month, they do a huge group ride with usually hundreds of riders at this point that go all around the city. And those are a lot of fun, especially, honestly, if you're a beginner cyclist, I think riding with a big group like that can be very freeing because you're away from traffic, but you're on the street.
And where do they do these? Are they on trails or are they on?
They're just on city streets.
They shut down the street, or?
They shut them down themselves. Okay. There's usually so many cyclists
by virtue of being such a huge volume.
Yeah, and they have marshals and folks doing safety. So it is 100% safe.
It's a pretty controlled environment.
Very controlled, very safe.
Yeah. What about Jack? Any social groups that you're aware of or that you recommend?
Off the top of my head, we used to have a group ride with kind of led by the shop in the summer Wednesday nights after we closed.
Okay.
And there was a fast group that did like 30 miles, and there was a more relaxed group that did 15 or 16 miles, and that went on for many, many years. And then the COVID summer pretty much put the kibosh on that.
Yeah.
And some people have starting it up again. I've told people that I'm absolutely willing to, use the shop to, trumpet it and announce it. And but that was a great start to the shop, and there was a community, a core group of people that many of whom I still keep in touch with today.
Yeah.
Who I wouldn't have met in the neighborhood, but for that. So,
I mean, we're very lucky to be in a location where we have urban and very quickly non-urban cycling options. We have the ocean, we have rivers and lakes, we have wooded areas. Like, it's a really scenic place to be a cyclist, I think. I want to talk a little bit about your group, Mandy's. You mentioned the crash data that you collect, and you have BCU labs too. Can you explain what the function is of those two functions?
Yeah, BCU Labs is our all volunteer run kind of like data team, similar to if you've heard of Transit Matters Labs. Yeah, they do like train tracking and that sort of thing. And so we're trying to do a very similar thing with biking. And there's a lot of really scattered data about bikes. I'm not a data person, but so I'm talking about this from an outsider perspective. But there's crash data, there's the Blue Bikes data, where people are going, what stations are used, that sort of thing. There's bike count data, some of which just got released, which is where I got that 30% on Mass Ave number.
Do you gather the data through like the city cameras, or?
The city gathers the data and they release it publicly.
Okay. And
so our goal is to put it all together into kind of one place and tell stories with that. So I think our first two public projects that we have had and released are, one is a stress map of the greater Boston area, showing every single street in Boston ranked 1 to 4, depending on how stressful it is.
Is it all just 4s?
Believe it or not, it's not. Okay. There's a lot of 4s that really shouldn't be 4s. Okay. I wish they weren't, because I write on them on a pretty regular basis. But there's a lot of 1s in Boston as well. I think residential streets are mostly 1s, easy to ride on. But places, there's parts of like Columbia that are 4s and parts of Columbia that are 1s.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, these long thoroughfares, I guess, would have different sections that are more or less dangerous, or
yeah,
it's not even a danger factor, right? Or is that part of it?
It's part of it. It's a lot about how fast cars are going on those streets, and what the infrastructure looks like. It was developed by Northeastern professor and BCU board member Peter Firth, the ranking system. It's called Level of Traffic Stress. It's very, very cool.
Is that specifically for bicycling data, or is it just, it's about cars, so it can be used for pedestrian safety? And
it is specific to bicycling, but a lot of the same things apply to pedestrians. So I think streets where it's level of traffic stress 1 will feel the same amount comfortable for a pedestrian. And a lot of these LTS 4 level roads, I think a pedestrian would feel that, Yeah. Mass Ave by the Newmarket Square area in South Bay used to be, I think, a classic example of a 4. Okay. Really fast traffic, small sidewalks, just very uncomfortable for almost everybody. Slip lanes that allow cars to take turns at really high speeds. And I think, since the cycle tracks were added, since the traffic calming was added, since these pedestrian islands and these, bus improvements have been added, I think it's gone really from an LTS 4 to, I would argue, LTS 2, but it's very comfortable to ride on.
Okay.
But part of that was to tell people, like, okay, where would you feel comfortable riding? And being able to like map that out, looking at this map, but also it's like, okay, where are the places where it's more uncomfortable to ride? Where are the places where there's a higher concentration of LTS4? Or where are there places like Columbia or Mass Ave where there's really safe parts to ride on and really dangerous parts to ride on the same street? And so we can use that kind of data to advocate to the city, like, we need to do better here.
Right. Or maybe even develop temporary alternate routes to get around some of those trickier areas.
Exactly. And another project that we have is the Landways project. Right now we have it for Cambridge and Somerville because it's a bit more built out, easier. But what it is everybody knows how to read a subway map, right? But what would that look like if we were to map out the bike network in a way that it looked like a subway map? And so we did that with Cambridge and Somerville. And you can look at it, there's like the bike red line. There's just this tiny little thing that doesn't go anywhere because there's no connecting bike infrastructure, safe bike infrastructure. And so we are able to use that, connect dots, and say, this is what the bike network could look like. So you can get everywhere in, Somerville and Cambridge for now, just on bike. And we can use that to advocate to these city governments to say, this is the most important part to actually complete a bike network. And that's something we're working on with Boston as a whole now. We got the early skeleton of it, but it hasn't been released yet.
That's really cool. And it's much more helpful to go to them with specific data and specific proposals versus, biking isn't safe or whatever. It's much more actionable.
Exactly. I mean, the city's doing so many different things. They have so many different hats, and they're in these community meetings getting yelled at. And I think it's useful for us to show, like, this is where you can have like a really big impact and really improve biking for everybody. And when you improve biking for everybody, more people bike.
Yeah. I will say as a driver and a pedestrian, I think when these roadways are improved for cyclists, they're improved for everybody. Like, I don't feel comfortable in an LT4 area driving, I'm sure, and certainly not walking my dog. So yeah, I think it benefits everyone to improve these areas.
And the data shows that. I think on Mass Ave, again, by that Newmarket Square area, it was one of the most dangerous places to drive. And now it's significantly safer. It's a lot easier to see pedestrians. There's basically no interactions unless you're driving in the bike lane with cyclists.
Yeah.
And so, everybody's happy, everybody's safe.
Yeah.
But it's really a win-win in our eyes, but it's still a fight.
Yeah. Totally. The last thing I want to close on this topic is around advice you would give to, and I'm going to open this up not just cyclists, but also drivers, pedestrians, anything that you would want to be able to communicate to them.
Wow, that's big. That is a big question. I think that we're all in this together. We're all trying to get around the city. I think especially for drivers, like, if you see someone on a bike, that's someone who's not in a car. That's someone who's not going to take a parking space where you're going to go. That's someone who's not contributing to traffic. It's largely a myth that people biking cause traffic. The reality is more people driving causes traffic. And I think it's very obvious when you put it like that, but I think a lot of people are, they see more people biking and they see traffic getting worse in Boston, and
they correlate
and
they
start to correlate the two, when really biking is kind of like biking, riding transit, walking places, like that's really the cure for Boston's traffic. And so I think we really need to be working together to make Boston safer, have less traffic, be more eco-friendly, and sometimes that starts with you getting on a bike. Whether that's just to go to the grocery store. I love biking to the grocery store. But yeah, small steps. Sometimes you don't need to drive your car 3 blocks to the grocery store.
I agree with that, definitely. Jack, I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, I know the city has a promotional campaign, Scan This Street for Wheels and Feet. And occasionally you'll see signs on buses or on the subway. That's the city's effort to basically do what Mandy's saying, just everyone pay attention.
Yeah.
That, that cyclists have a right to be on the road and pedestrians have a right to be, crossing the street. And so just for everyone to be mindful is,
yeah.
And that, and of course I've heard some motorists say, oh, well, these cyclists, I saw one run a red light and...
Yeah, of course.
And absolutely.
You know how many drivers I've seen run a red light?
Yeah. But, so I also to cyclists too, that, you're in there, you're riding the roads, you're in the traffic flow to be mindful of that as well.
Yeah, I agree. One thing that I've had to train myself on after I moved to from a rural area to the city years ago is just checking both rear view mirrors before I open my doors, because you definitely don't want to door someone. All right, last question. Total, your favorite place to eat in Dorchester? Jack, you're a Dorchester guy. I'll start with you.
Well, there are a handful of restaurants around here that we frequent often, but last night, coincidentally, my wife and I went to Ghost Pepper at Savin Hill.
Nice.
We both liked it a lot.
Yeah, good margaritas. Yeah. How about you, Mandy?
I live in Alston, so I'm like kind of far away, but I do bike in Dorchester quite a bit because my band practices over here. My favorite place has got to be Bala and on Dot Ave, the Vietnamese sandwich place. Oh, I love that place.
I've heard so many good things.
You gotta go.
Need to check it out.
You gotta go.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much. This is a really great conversation. And Jack, thanks again for having us in your place. And people, come check out Ashmont Cycle.
Great. Thank you both.
Thank you. DotLife is supported by the record company, Boston's leading provider of accessible music creation spaces. The record company is addressing the critical shortage of affordable creative space in our city, serving over 4,000 monthly users across 131 communities. They've preserved 47,000 square feet of professional studio and rehearsal space at rates 60 to 90% below market value, ensuring Boston's musicians have a place to create, regardless of economic means. But they're more than just affordable space. They're building career pathways through partnerships with Bunker Hill Community College, offering professional certification programs that lead to sustainable music careers. This vital work is at risk. As creative spaces continue to disappear across Boston, the record company needs community support to maintain these essential resources. Their Amplify Boston campaign directly funds space preservation and career development programs. Visit therecordcompany.org today. That's therecordco.org to donate, become a monthly supporter, or learn about partnership opportunities. Every contribution helps keep Boston's music ecosystem thriving. The Record Company, creating accessible pathways to music creation since 2010. Back to DotLife. We are joined today for this week's Tiny Dot concert by Phil Berman. Hey, Phil.
Hello. Happy
to have you here.
Happy to be here.
You made a trip down from Cambridge today.
Yeah, it wasn't too bad. Okay. Waze took me in a very reasonable direction.
But a nice new route for you, right?
Yeah, I really dread that like 5-lane merge you have to do.
The death merge?
The death merge. I've only been driving for like 5 years, and so I still get a lot of agita, and like every time I come to the record company, I'm just like,
close your eyes and merge.
Well, I very much have them wide open. I'll let you know. As open as they possibly can be.
Well, it sounds like you found a back route, which we will not tell people about.
It was just through Southie. I don't know. It's not a secret. But yeah.
Well, thanks for coming. You've been in Cambridge for a bit, but you've also lived in other places in Boston. But you're originally a Jersey guy.
Yeah, I'm a Jersey boy.
And you moved here for undergrad.
I came to Boston University for undergrad. I was in the theater program, and I had a great time at BU. And then I started, while I was at BU doing the theater thing, I was also I was in a couple different bands with some of my roommates, and I was really interested in songwriting and making music, and that's not something I took guitar lessons when I was a kid, but I was very allergic to music theory. I just wanted to like play the songs that I liked and not really think about it too much. And I had always sort of been songwriting, but in college is when it sort of really started to pick up, and we were doing shows in basements and shows in our apartment, and the little Alston DIY scene. and then I really started to take music seriously a couple years after I had been out of school. Yeah.
I am not surprised at all to hear about your theater background.
Yeah,
because
most people
think there's
aren't.
some infusion of theater,
For sure.
theatrical sound in your music, which I love.
Yeah,
It's very cool. It actually reminded me the first time I heard you. I found you when you applied for Dorchfest this year, first time.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah, loved having you.
Dorchfest was phenomenal, by the way. It was like
aside from the rain.
Aside from the well, that's you can't really do anything about that. But
I try.
But I thought, I mean, I've played a lot of porch fests. This was huge to me. Was that there were like 3 or 4 houses like clustered together, and you staggered the start times of the concerts. So great. I cannot tell you how many times you're competing with I'm competing with like the metal band that's 2 doors down, and like no shade to the metal band, like that's great, but like planning it so that they don't overlap was
the map
excellent.
is a labor of love for like the last month and a half of Dorchfest.
Y'all crushed it.
Thank
really
you.
Great. Yeah.
Thank you. But when I first found you for Dorchfest, or when you found us, I was reminded of the King George song in Hamilton.
Oh yeah,
I could definitely hear you singing that song.
That would be really fun. Thank you. Yeah, I definitely, musical theater is like a big influence of mine, among other things. Like probably my songwriting hero is like Steve Sondheim.
Okay.
And so that as is Lin-Manuel Miranda is also a Steve Sondheim devotee, and so I think a lot of those principles, his 4 big songwriting rules very much filter into my work.
Yeah, for sure. One thing though that I am surprised to hear you say is that you're not a music theory guy, because you do not make it easy on yourself.
Right.
There's a few songs where you've got some mixed time signatures.
For sure. Yeah.
Some syncopation.
Yeah. Well, I would say I wasn't a music theory guy, and then I found this pedagogy called Dalcroze Eurythmics, which is a very fancy way of saying like we move to music that's being played, and that kind of broke open music theory for me.
Just a different way to think about music theory?
Different way to think about, well, it's less thinking and more feeling and moving, and then thinking later. So like we move and we experience first, and then we say, what was that thing that happened? And it's just I think it's the best way to learn music, personally.
Okay, so you brought a hybrid instrument.
Yes.
We had a banjo-lele on the show a couple of weeks ago, and now we've got a banjo-tar.
Technically, this is a 6-string...
Gitjo,
banjo-tar, something like that. Yeah, 6-string banjo.
Okay.
If you're a banjo purist, this is not your instrument. It's very much like guitar in a banjo font. You can kind of think about that.
It just brings the tone of the banjo to the
guitar?
it
just because of the drum head and the body, it just makes it sound banjo-y. But it's also nylon string, which is like for like a classical guitar neck, which is kind of rare.
Okay.
So I saw this instrument on Reverb Nation at like 2 a.m. one night, and I was like, instant purchase.
Was this a drunk purchase?
I won't comment on that, but I was may not have been in my basic faculties, but yes, it was. I have no regrets. It's a happy purchase.
So you started with guitar, and then you primarily play this hybrid instrument now, or do you kind of mix?
I need to do a little bit of guitar maintenance. I would like to be when everything's fixed up. I would like to have guitar and banjo sort of switching back and forth. I also play piano, so I'd like to. Yeah, that's sort of in my dream gig where I have a large car that I can ship all these instruments around. Plus Forrest's bass. I often play with Forrest, who has a giant upright bass that takes up. We basically
some
have to
space.
Lean. It takes up some space. We have to lean the passenger seat back, and then he's perfected this technique, but Tetrising an upright bass into a Honda Civic.
Oh wow! So you're here alone today, but you typically play with quite a few other musicians.
Yeah, I play. My band is called Phil and the Flying Leap, and so our sort of default formation is me singing and playing, and then Forrest Pettengill on upright bass, and my friend Rachel Panich on violin.
Okay.
We sometimes can, depending on the gig or depending on if we have the budget for it, I'll add other members. So sometimes we have string duet or string trio, and then we like to have drums. Probably my largest configuration was like 9 players at one point. That was for a concert right before COVID lockdown happened. Yeah, but I love playing with lots of musicians. I love making different textures and arrangements, and it's just so fun to collaborate with people. When I'm songwriting, it's just sort of me in my little brain world. I'm just sort of doing it by myself. And then when you have other really good musicians who are good collaborators and improvisers, they can just take the song to like a whole other level.
Yeah.
And it's just really fun for me. That's like part of the joy of it.
I want to talk about your songwriting, and one thing I want to talk about is weirdness.
Yeah.
There's a theme of weirdness a
Yeah.
bit through your music, and
yeah.
You're not the first musician that we've had in here or that exists in the world that kind of indexes in hard on weirdness. Why do you think weirdness is a thing that musicians have in their heads? Are musicians weird? Are you weird?
I'm pretty weird.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's kind of a weird thing, like our society is really not set up for people to be successful to do this,
Yeah.
And so and then even if you're
you mean economically and
yeah, economically, like it's just not, especially in 2025, like it's just not set up to be successful and have this be like your job. And so it just feels like you have to be pushing against the current to be able to make this happen, both at like from an economic standpoint and also like even from an artistic standpoint, like there's so much pressure to just make the same thing, like make a song that will be accepted by the algorithm and will get to people, right? And then it's at that point, it's like, well, why am I doing this?
Right, everyone else has already.
Everyone
done
else
this.
is already doing that. An AI program can also do that,
Yeah.
So like, what do I really have to say? And
Yeah.
so, part of the joy of that and also the challenge of that is like really just sort of sticking true to my own guns, and in some ways, like not being financially supported by this, it gives me the freedom to like, I don't have to worry about like generating whatever
is gonna hit.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm super focused on like, I'm gonna make the music that's coming out of me, and that's my responsibility.
Yep.
And it's y'all's job to like figure out how you fit
How
into
it
that. Which,
I like that.
Which might be like a marketing like, like
no.
no.
I can, but as a marketer, I can tell you that's not how we usually approach
That's
things.
probably
but
not. Yeah. But I think, I mean, like, why do it any other way? You
Yeah.
have, I just have to like, my job is just to be really honest with whatever song is coming out of me at any given moment. Mm-hmm.
You also have a very strong connection with kids. You work with kids as your day job.
Yeah.
In the music space.
Yeah.
And you also have some other non-traditional coworkers, which are
Yes.
puppets.
Yes.
How do those? What do you do with those, with kids and with puppets? And how can
Sure.
people see you?
Yeah. So I work with very young kids. I teach age 0 to 5.
That is very young.
It is
0
very
is
young.
quite young.
0 is quite young. Actually, I love the babies are probably my favorite
Really?
age group to work with. Yeah. Baby music classes it's just like this abstract performance art, and like, but there's like a lot of developmental science research that like backs up a lot of the stuff that we're doing in the field.
So when you say you work with 0 to 5, are you going into daycares?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what does a session look like?
So a session might look like where babies can't really move yet, if they're as young as if they're 0. Sometimes they can sit up, sometimes they're totally just back and just taking it in. So for the research behind what we do and how we work with infants, it's a lot of like they're just absorbing the sound. They're in this stage called acculturation, which means they're absorbing the sound of the music in their environment. So that's when we're starting to develop like our basic foundational understanding of like, this is how songs go. We like start at the 1 chord and we end at the 1 chord. We go to the 4 and the 5. We can sing in different keys. We can sing in minor keys, major keys, different time signatures. And really the goal is...
Babies get time signatures?
Oh yeah. Well, what do you mean by get? Like what we're doing is they're just absorbing the sound. They're just hearing and internalizing the music, And sometimes they may just look at you. Sometimes they may have a little shaker and like shake it, and it's not really related to the what
they're
I'm doing.
not on the beat.
They're not on the beat yet, but that's not really the point. The point is just that they're just like soaking it all in. But you can. I mean, it's
do you know? Like, can you put a correlation between what you're doing and their reaction?
Oh yeah. I mean,
that's so cool.
Well, I mean, it's there's different developmental stages. So like the stage where they're making an intentional reaction to you, like a focused reaction.
Yeah.
That's like, they would have to be, well, chronological age isn't necessarily tied to development necessarily. Right. Everyone's on their own path. But, you know, so sometimes I may have, you know, like I may have a baby, we have this big drum, and like sometimes a baby will just find their own beat and just be wailing on it. And then in that case, now it's my responsibility to, like, I'm listening to you and I'm matching your rhythm, right? So it's not a performance. It's like we're having an interactive, collaborative moment.
That's so cool.
But yeah, I think what I love about that age group is just they haven't developed that self-conscious eye yet, where you know, adults are like, oh, I feel embarrassed, or I feel vulnerable. I shouldn't be. You know, they don't have that yet,
right?
And so they just want to love.
That's
you know,
amazing.
which is really fun. Yeah.
So this is through New England Conservatory, and you just go in and there's like a circle of babies and you're just playing. That's so
it's pretty
fun.
It's
That's
pretty
your
great.
job?
Yeah, it's my job.
Wow.
Yeah, and it goes up to age 5. So the 3
Gets
and 4 year olds,
that
gets a little more rambunctious for sure. Yeah, but it's super fun. But then at that age, then they can really be moving and responding and asking questions and thinking about it and expressing themselves. And so, yeah, it's a really beautiful age to be working with. And then all of the other sort of toxic music things, like you're really not singing on key, like you really should not be singing, or like you didn't practice, or all of that stuff.
You're not very good at this.
You're not very good. Yeah. I don't have to deal with that stuff. I'm just here to like give them love, and like this is what art is, and like this is a supportive, welcoming place for you. And then the rest of that stuff they can deal with later. That's
how long does this last? Like a half hour?
Yeah, sessions are usually about 30 minutes.
30 minutes, okay. And then talk about the puppet showcase.
Oh yeah, Puppet Showplace Theater.
Showplace.
Yeah. Puppet Showplace. They just turned 51.
Wow.
Yeah, it's amazing. Like the fact if you've never been, it's like a 100-seat theater in Brookline Village.
Yep. Okay.
And it's amazing. They have puppet shows and performers from all around the country and all over the world come through and perform. And it's just really nice when we have grandparents who brought their kids, and now they're bringing their kids to see shows in the same theater, and it's just a very magical place to be. So,
and this is for programming for both kids and adults.
Yes, yeah. So I graduated theater school, and then that was one of my first times working with puppets was at a puppet slam, which is like grown up puppet.
Is it like Avenue Q grown up, or is it just like...
It depends.
Okay.
It can certainly be that. It is very raunchy sometimes.
Oh, raunchy puppets.
Yeah, you know, because, you know, we're working with kids all the time, and you have to put on, like, you know, I try not to have too much of a persona, but, like, I do have, like, a classroom manner, you know, when I'm working with young kids. So it's nice to, you know, sort of hang that at the door and be like,
get it all out.
Get it all
through
out.
The puppet.
Yeah. So that was my first entry into that world, and then I was asked to do a series called Puppet Playtime for kids 3 and below, and I'd never worked with young children before. And what I love about this age group is they're really bad at lying to you. They can't lie and tell you, oh, I really liked what you did, when they really didn't like it. Like if they're not interested in what you're doing, they will just walk away from you. And so they're my
instant feedback.
Instant feedback. They're like the best teacher, because you can just tell immediately, like, oh, this is working or it's not. Yeah.
You wrote music for the theater, but you're also a puppeteer. You do both.
Sometimes I will get behind the booth, and do some puppetry. I love working with puppets. It's kind of the same as, you know, like in college, in theater school, we studied mask. You know, working with different masks, and puppetry is basically the same thing, but it's just on your hand, you know, instead of on your face. So I have done some puppetry before, but I really love doing music for puppets. It's like, I don't know, music and puppets, it's like a thousands of years old tradition. It's one of the oldest forms of entertainment in the world. And so it just has this like magic thing that happens.
Right?
It's a raw, yeah. So this show that just premiered, Party Animals, I wrote 7 songs, one gets a reprise, so it's like 7.5. So I wrote 7 songs for that, and then we collaborated with some really cool rock metal musicians, and we recorded the score at the record company, and now it like exists, and it'll be on Boston Common for free on July 5th if people want to see it.
Very cool.
Yeah.
We're gonna play 4 songs today. Talk us through what those are. Did you write all 4 of them? Okay.
Yeah. So I'm playing one song off of my first record that I released as myself, as Phil Berman. That's called The Battle of Bunker Hill. And I wrote that song when I had just gotten out of college, and I was working as a Boston Harbor historical cruise narrator, which is everyone's first out of college job, obviously. And I was just like passing the Bunker Hill Monument over and over every day, like, and wondering like, what am I doing with my life? Because like I think, you know, in those programs, well, I'll speak to the BU program, you know, there's so much attention is paid on like, how are you feeling? Like, what's your process? Like, what's going on for you? What's your journey? What do you need? And then you get out and it's like, psh,
how are you going to make money?
Who cares, you know? So it's kind of like you're just like dumped, like, you know. So that song is about that moment in my life. And then I'll play a song from Play the Part, which is our debut Phil and the Flying Leap record.
Okay.
That's called Billerica Honey. And that's a really fun song. It's pretty gay.
Okay.
And and a little raunchy. That's definitely a Puppet Slam song.
It's a very sexy song.
Yeah. So I did that. I'm gonna do a song from Party Animals called Space is Weird. And I'll tell you a little bit about that one. It's very David Bowie, Ziggy Stardust, sort of flavored.
Speaking of weird musicians.
Yeah, speaking of weird musicians. Yeah. I that was kind of, I think I wrote the Party Animals theme song first, and then that was like the first like chunk of song that came out for that show. And then I'm going to do a song that has not come out yet called Spring Again, which we recorded at the record company, and we were hoping was going to come out in the spring, but mixing just takes forever.
Yeah.
And it's a very seasonal song, and so it would feel weird to like release it in October or something. So it'll probably, we're hoping it'll come out spring of 2026.
Got it. Okay, well, glad we get a teaser.
Yeah, a little teaser.
So aside from the puppet show plays and the daycares, where can people find you?
Where can they find me? They can find us playing around with Phil and the Flying Leap. Let's see, we're doing a show at the Armory in Somerville in July. We love playing porch fests. We love doing public park shows. We love playing with other musicians, so you can look for us around. And you can find us on social media, on Instagram and TikTok and Facebook and, oh God, all those other ones.
And you have a nice website.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Do you want to drop the
URL? philandtheflyingleap.com. And my website, if you want to learn about early childhood stuff, is philberman.net.
Awesome. Well, let's hear it.
Great.
Let's go.
Let's do it.
All right.
I'm in different time zones. I'm in different time zones now. Somehow you can rest your head. I am in different time zones. I'm in different time zones now. Somehow my open heart is overfilled with every thought that won't sit still. A battle fought on Bunker Hill. Somehow I am in different time zones. I'm in different time zones now. Somehow my empty heart recalls the thrill, a happiness imposed by will. I've gotta get off Bunker Hill and get me back to home terrain, somewhere I can finally shed my second skin. Little lies in little games as I play and wonder when the truth begins. In different time zones, I'm in different time zones now. Cool. That song is called "The Battle of Bunker Hill." That's off my first record that came out 10 years ago. Whoa. Title track. I'm gonna play a song off of my most recent record called "Play the Part." That came out 4 years ago in 2021. Working on the next one. You'll hear something from that later. This song is called "Billerica Honey." And it was inspired by a jar of raw, organic, local, unfiltered honey. And it turned into a song about a gay bear hookup app in the Boston suburban area. So here it is. Woof woof, says he, from a pen off 95. This city slicker skipping town, if I have to learn to drive with the back door open and the back seat wet. Well, lucky me, this pedigreed heavy pet is gonna get a better pet. And I'm cooked in Cambridge, Somerville is on the shelf. In Mattapan, I'm a wanted man, I gotta look out for my health. And his cup overfloweth in the quest to quench my thirst. He's my Billerica honey, and I said I saw him first. Oh, wow. But look, says he, it ain't tricky to explain that if you want sugar honey, you can lick it off the cane. And his eyes turn beeswax and the air turn blood. Oh, picture me your fleur-de-lis before I leave your belly up within the flood. And I stayed your flower and the hour turned to 2. And before we blew it, honey, we had loved us black and blue. And my fate I do not knoweth, but for better or for worse, he's my Billerica honey, and it's just the second verse. But says me from the other side of town, ever since you flew here, honey, I can barely pin you down. And you put me through the ringer with your stinger in my side. Boy, you're cute as hell, but I still can't tell if the ignition were the goddamn right. Hush, hush, says he, what you wish is in my power, and to brew the truest honey, I got a buzz from flower to flower. And I'll burn him, Lord, I'll smoke him, for to kick him out my hide. He's my Billerica honey, wanted dead but best alive. Knock, 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 says he, what I thought is all you need. And if you want grade A honey, you better be prepared to bleed. And my gut turned to royal jelly as he rubbed my wounds with salt. My shriveled slug ain't got no love, and it's all your ego's fault. Kiss, kiss, says he, what you are is what you eat. And if you be daddy's sonny, you can help inspect the meat. Well, I'm really sorry, Papa, no one speaks like that to me. Keep your Billerica honey, I got peaches in JP. Keep your Billerica honey, honey, don't come back to me. It is such a sexy song. It's a very sexy song. Maybe a little too sexy. I'm gonna do this song, and I wrote this song. I wrote this song for a puppet show that just went up at Puppet Show Place Theater in Brookline, and it's for a show called Party Animals by Sarah Nolan, who is one of our local puppeteer treasures. And so this song, the show is about a bunch of animals throwing their first birthday party. And all the animals have a form of social anxiety in some way. And so this is sung by Taylor the Goth Sloth, who feels she's just too weird to be at the party, you know. And the Goth Sloth is visited by a moth who may or may not be David Bowie, you know, and it makes sense in the show, and who visits her and tells her that in the compared to the vast expanse of the cosmos, we're all kind of weird, and in fact, being weird is exactly what you want to be, because that is natural. It's pure nature. Space, space, space is weird. Space, 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 space is weird. A stellar mass black hole would stretch you to spaghetti, and all as a red giant star expands. The hot Venusian atmosphere could melt you into jelly upon its sulfur sands. Space, 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 space is weird. Space, 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 space is weird. The blazing comet's icy tail, a constellation of a whale. Dark matter is surrounding us. We've no clue about the stuff. Spooky action at the quantum level dictates light speed constants, timelines stretching on and on. A singular phenomenon. Space, 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 space is weird. Space, 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 space is weird. Everything you love is weird. Everything above is weird. And everything that's cool is weird. And everything that rules is weird. And everything you see is weird. The entire galaxy is weird. It's weird, 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 it's weird. This song is not out yet, but I've been singing it across the land anyway. So this song is called Spring Again. It'll be on our next record, which will hopefully come out next year. And I wrote this song a couple months after I'd been laid off from a job that was very important to me. And I was feeling all sorts of ways about it. And I was walking around Fresh Pond and was really just sort of... the song is really remarking on the ability of springtime and the nature of the changing of the seasons to help find your own personal sense of renewal and rejuvenation and rebirth. So this is called Spring Again. Vernal chorus sing before us through the rising sun. Fiddle heads and spider threads unfurl when dawn is done. Bird and blossom chive and possum herald winter's end. Every tree sings it must be spring again, spring again. Spring again. Buoyed and blessed we build our nest with scraps of maize of yore. Caked in pollen, life is calling, crawling through my open door. Private battles, fours and cattle lean into the wind. Feels like June all afternoon. I'm tuned to spring again, spring again, spring again, spring again, spring again. season's worth, sown to every corner of the earth. Apogee and ecstasy, the mayflies make their mirth, signaling the hour of my rebirth. I remember in September when something in me died. Cruel November and December kicked me as I cried. January, February marched to their own drum. April, give and take until the springtime comes. Spring again. Spring again, spring again, spring again, oh, spring again, spring again, spring again, spring again. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to DotLife, which is available on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. DotLife is produced and edited by me, Erin Caldwell. Technical support is provided by Yasser Mahmoud and John Forry. Additional support is provided by the Dorchester Reporter and the Record Company. Thanks to Jack Pelletier, Mandy Wilkens, Bill Forry, and Phil Berman for joining this week's show. We would love it if you could share, subscribe, rate, and review the pod wherever you listen. If you are interested in supporting the podcast, visit dotlifepod.com for more information.